Have you ever played the masterpiece that is Terraria? Well, this game is sort of similar. Maybe you love Stardew Valley. This game is also kind of similar. Thankfully, it's different enough to be somewhere kind of in between. I'm Sam the Ashen, and this is Necesse. Necesse was released in 2019 into early access, and the sale price was $15, which is a super nice change of pace as far as games being priced. Although indie games, to give them credit, do seem to do a pretty good job on pricing. It has about 11,000 reviews sitting at very positive, which is pretty big for an indie game. The tags that the game has are simulation, 2D, and base building, but this is really not even close to describing what the game is like. The game is a 2D top-down survival crafting action-adventure RPG with a pretty good focus on base and settlement building. It's sometimes hard for games to succeed when they don't focus on a core aspect instead of being sort of a jack-of-all-trades, and Necesse does attempt to do this. To dive a little bit deeper into what playing the game is actually like, I'll start with the early game. You start off at the base island, a small forest area with a singular house. The occupant of the house is an elderly man who clearly has a quest for you, along with some information about how to get started, kind of guiding you on what to do and where to go first. You can either start off by chopping some trees like you do in any other survival game, or if you notice the ladder in the small house, you can take a trip down to the caves. Before we get any further, it's important to know that these caves and islands in the game are procedurally generated, which means that you really shouldn't run into the same cave twice. But on the flip side, this also means that these caves and dungeons and islands aren't handcrafted, so more on that later. Once you go down into the caves, you might be lucky and see a path and be able to explore. But if you're not lucky, you'll have to dig your way around until you find an opening. The early digging is extremely slow. I know it can be tough for games to find a balance, but I would say that it's definitely on the slow end and would benefit from making stronger harvesting tools. Before long, you'll start to run into the first enemies of the game, and there are zombies and goblins. Some zombie archers, and they'll shoot arrows at you, and the goblins are small and a little bit faster. If you venture deeper into the caves, you might come across a crypt, and these crypts have coffins in them along with fog floating around. The crypts are actually pretty cool, and they do a good job of giving off an eerie atmosphere. You'll see bats flying around, which then quickly turn into vampires. Right off the bat, you're probably thinking, wow, that's actually pretty good enemy variety, and it is, for now. The early game is pretty slow, and you'll run into these enemies over and over again, with only small cosmetic variations if you go to a different biome or cave. It's not a huge deal, but it does get repetitive after a while. So, on to the combat. The combat, at least at first, is really simple. All you're really able to do is swing your sword while you back away from the enemy. Luckily, before long, you'll probably get your hands on some trinkets, and some of them add abilities like being able to sprint or to roll. This does add to the combat and add to the overall pace of the game, because without these, the pace is really slow, which, to be fair, isn't always a bad thing. You also start off with 4 trinket slots, which can add anything from a light to go around so you don't have to place a torch every 5 seconds, or an increase to critical chance or adding fire to your attacks, which is nice because this allows for some variety, and maybe even specific builds that you could put together. For weapon variety, there are swords, great swords, bows, magic weapons like staves and tomes, and there's also summoning weapons, so you can actually have a few minions running around with you. There's actually a pretty good amount of variety here. There's also different sets of armor, like iron and gold, different things like that, and there are multiple options so you can get the set bonus that benefits your build the most. Putting all this together does add a lot of fun to the combat, but the main thing holding it back is the enemy variety. Even past the zombies, there are other enemies like skeletons, but for the most part, they all behave the same. There's a few odd and end enemies, like in the swamp, there's some jelly slimes that kind of jump around, And this is what the game needs more of. They don't behave like the other enemies moving slowly towards you, they jump sporadically. It's just this overall difference that the game needs to incorporate more. Other than them, they all have about the same speed and just kind of walk at you to make contact damage. There's ranged enemies that just hang back and throw or shoot something at you, and for the majority of enemies, that's it. It doesn't feel like there's much enemy AI behind just pathing to the player and just trying to make contact damage. This may not sound like a lot, but for me, it did make the game feel pretty repetitive way sooner than it should have. I was much less motivated to explore the caves when I already knew what was down there, and that's saying something considering the game is procedurally generated. Just to make this clear at the end, the combat isn't bad and the gear system is actually pretty good, it's just the enemy variety that holds it all back for me. Now, after you explore all these caves and get all these resources, you gotta have a home to bring it back to. Luckily, on your starter island, there's already one house to give you an idea. Upon exploring different islands, you might find some settlements that are already made and meet some villagers that you can talk to and ask them to join you. Some of them accept for free, and some of them you have to have a requirement, like you have to bring the hunter 20 leather and some gold coins. And after that, they go back to your island, but they want to have a roof over their head and a bed to sleep in and some food. Luckily though, they also contribute to the settlement, unlike that damn goblin tinkerer from Terraria. That dude has swindled way too many platinum coins away from me. If you recruit a hunter, they will hunt on your island to bring back food and leather from animals. If you recruit a miner, they will go down into the caves and get materials for you. If you recruit a guard, they will protect your village, because at some point there will be enemy raids. They come and they try to take over your village and kill your people. It's up to you to build strategically to be able to send them off, and you just can't put a wall around your whole village like you could back then before these updates. Now the raiders can break walls, so you actually have to be strategic if you want your villagers to survive. The game doesn't have much in common with the game RimWorld, but being encouraged to build strategically did kind of remind me of having to build strategically in RimWorld. But I'll be honest, it's on a whole nother level as far as settlement games go. Another aspect that reminded me of RimWorld was villager happiness. If they don't have a bed, they won't sleep, and they'll be pretty upset. If you don't have a designated food box, they'll starve, and then they'll be really upset. So it's up to you to keep them happy. Oh, what happens if you don't keep them happy, you ask? Something terrible, something so unimaginable. They take more breaks. I'm literally not even joking, it's incredibly easy to keep them happy. I had to make them unhappy on purpose to test this. The only thing I ever had happen was that they took more breaks. I looked it up online to make sure to see if I could find anything, and it said the same thing, as well as merchant villagers sometimes charging higher prices. So yeah, it's easy to keep them happy. But on the other hand, there's not much motivation to make a cool, decked out village and keep everybody happy when no one really cares about it. This is definitely subjective, and it could be totally different for other people, but for me, the settlement aspect did not entirely hit the mark. This is an unfair comparison, but I'm gonna make it anyways. I think of a game like Dwarf Fortress, where you have to keep your people happy, and if you don't, they will literally rise up in a revolution and kill each other. If you give one person too much, someone else might get jealous and poison their drink so that they can overtake their position. I don't know if it's fair or not, but a game that's as old as Dwarf Fortress with mechanics and ideas that good should have kind of set the standard for how settlements should work. They don't have to go all out and do everything that Dwarf Fortress did, but it would be nice if more games, including Necesse, took some notes on how to raise the stakes for settlement mechanics. So, just to be clear here, the settlement aspect is not bad. I bet some people will actually really like it. It just didn't hit the mark for me, and I think there was a lot of missed opportunities here. Finally, the exploration and the progression, since the two are kind of intertwined. One of the main aspects of this game are islands. You start off on an island, and to explore beyond that, you need to make a boat and go out to another island. There are hundreds of islands, potentially infinite. I will say at first the exploration is pretty good. You have the islands to explore, and then you ladder down into the caves and explore those. Every biome you go to, there's a different themed cave, like an ice cave, a swamp cave, a desert cave, and the aesthetics are pretty different, and usually have different ore and materials. There are even some puzzle rooms or challenge rooms occasionally, offering you a pretty cool obstacle course type area that rewards you with some loot at the end. But after exploring the few different biomes and their caves, which happens pretty quickly, then the world starts to feel a little less expansive and more repetitive. Pretty much every ice cave and every ice island is the same as the next, and the same goes for the other biomes. Sometimes you might find a village on the island, which is pretty cool. You find a few, and then all those start to feel the same too. So while the exploration is pretty cool at first, this quickly runs out, and the variety that procedural generation usually provides feels almost non-existent. I would still say that this is subjective and kind of a personal opinion, but I feel like the game would have been way better off if they had caves and have them be handcrafted, even the islands too. But I'm not sure, maybe that wasn't an option. As you explore these new places, you'll find new materials to craft better gear, and eventually you'll start fighting some bosses. There's usually a different boss for each biome, one in the cave, and one into the level deeper into the deep cave. There's a total of 11 bosses altogether, and bosses overall are pretty well done. From a design viewpoint, they all feel pretty different. Some of them feel kinda similar, but it's not like a copy and paste boss. Each of them usually has a certain mechanic that you have to work around, whether it's dodging projectiles or trying not to get wrapped up in the giant caterpillar. So far, I think this is one of the game's strongest points, and it's also important to keep in mind that the game still gets updates, and a lot has been added since 2019, and there will probably be more to come. So I know I had some gripes with the game, but overall for $15, you should definitely get a lot of bang for your buck. There isn't a massive ton of content, which makes me think that they slowed down the early games so that it didn't feel too short, but there's definitely enough content to justify the $15. If you really like Terraria or open world survival games or even Stardew Valley, then you'll probably like Necesse. I appreciate you watching the video. If you enjoyed it, leaving a like helps me out a lot, and I'd love to know your opinions down in the comments. If you want to see more from me in the future, subscribe because I post once every 2 weeks on Sunday, so I'll never clog up your feed. I hope you have a good one. Peace out.